Ethan Brooks vanished without a trace during what was supposed to be a simple weekend yacht trip with his coworkers. Mason Kell, the charismatic CEO, insisted it was a tragic accident, that Ethan had fallen overboard after a night of drinks and high waves. But when Ethan's body washed ashore 2 weeks later, battered and bruised in ways that didn't match a fall, everything changed. Behind the smiles and celebrations hid a dark secret, and someone on that boat was hiding the truth. It was supposed to be a weekend of celebration. Ethan Brooks, a 32-year-old software engineer known for his quiet intelligence and steady presence at the tech startup Riverbite, had been invited to join 5 of his co-workers for a short yacht trip along the Oregon coast. The group had just completed a successful product launch, a major milestone for the company, and the outing was framed as a reward for the team's hard work. The Yacht, a sleek modern vessel owned by Riverbite's co-founder Mason Kell, set off on a sunny Saturday afternoon from a private marina just outside of Newport. Spirits were high, drinks flowed, and music played from the deck speakers as the group cruised out into open water. Photos posted to social media showed the crew smiling, holding up champagne glasses, lounging on deck chairs. Ethan appeared in a few of them, standing a little off to the side as usual, but smiling nonetheless. Those who knew him said he wasn't the type to go on boat trips or drink heavily, but coworkers said he seemed relaxed that day, even cheerful. No one suspected anything was wrong. By the following morning, everything had changed. Mason was the first to report Ethan missing. He told the Coast Guard that Ethan had gone to bed late Saturday night after having a few drinks, and by morning he was gone. The yacht was anchored offshore, the ocean calm enough that no one had worried during the night. The rest of the crew confirmed Mason's version of events. Ethan had stayed up later than most, and when they woke up, he simply wasn't there. A shoe was found on the deck near the railing, and a partially spilled beer bottle was discovered nearby. The assumption was immediate: Ethan must have fallen overboard. It was tragic, but not unheard of. Alcohol, nighttime darkness, the gentle sway of the boat. The explanation seemed simple. The Coast Guard launched a search operation that lasted nearly 2 days. Helicopters scanned the coastline, boats combed the area, but no trace of Ethan was found. His family was devastated, his co-workers shaken. Memorial posts began appearing online. To everyone watching from the outside, it was just a terrible accident. But in private, a few people on that yacht knew something no one else did. Ethan's disappearance wasn't just unlucky, it was planned. And the ocean had only hidden the truth, it hadn't erased it. 14 days after Ethan Brooks vanished from the yacht, a local fisherman walking along the coast near Cape Arago made a grim discovery. It was early morning, just after sunrise, when he spotted something tangled among the rocks and seaweed at the edge of the beach. At first, he thought it was a large piece of driftwood or debris washed in by the tide. But as he got closer, the shape became clear. It was a body, swollen from the sea, pale and still, half buried in the sand. Authorizations were called immediately. Within hours, the area was sealed off and investigators were on site. The body was badly decomposed, but fingerprints confirmed the identity: Ethan Brooks. The discovery stunned the community. Most had assumed he was gone for good, lost to the depths. The idea that he had washed ashore was disturbing, but what was even more disturbing was what the medical examiner found during the autopsy. There were injuries on Ethan's body that didn't align with the theory of an accidental fall. His wrists showed signs of ligature marks, bruises that looked like he'd been tied or restrained. Deep under the scalp, there was blunt force trauma to the back of his head, consistent with a blow from a heavy object. His ribs were fractured in a way that suggested he had been hit, not from falling, but possibly from being kicked or struck with force. Most telling of all, there was no water in his lungs. That meant Ethan didn't drown. He was already dead when his body entered the water. The official cause of death was listed as homicide, Newspapers spread quickly. Suddenly, what had been dismissed as a tragic boating accident was being reclassified as a criminal investigation. Detectives began re-examining everything. The yacht, the timeline, the people on board. Questions that had once seemed unnecessary now took center stage. Why hadn't the cameras recorded the moment Ethan vanished? Why did everyone's stories line up so perfectly? And most importantly, if Ethan had been murdered, who on that boat had a reason to kill him? The calm, clean narrative that had comforted Ethan's family began to unravel. He hadn't just fallen into the ocean. Someone had made sure he never left that yacht alive. The waves had only delayed the truth. Now it was rising to the surface. The yacht trip had started with 6 people and returned with only 5. As investigators reopened the case, they turned their attention to the surviving passengers, Ethan's coworkers and companions on that fateful weekend. Each of them had a role at Riverbight and a connection to Ethan, though some were closer to him than others. Mason Kell, the co-founder and owner of the yacht, had invited everyone personally. Charismatic and confident, Mason presented himself as a generous leader rewarding his team. Then there was Lucas Hart, the product manager, whose relationship with Ethan was known to be tense. Claire Morgan, the UX designer, was quieter and more reserved, and the remaining 2 were developers like Ethan, Jake Lynn, and Priya Das. When first questioned after Ethan's disappearance, all 5 co-workers gave near-identical statements. They said the night had ended uneventfully. Everyone had gone to their cabins, and by the time they realized Ethan was missing the next morning, it was already too late. They recalled that he had been drinking and that he seemed tired, possibly disoriented. Some even said he had made jokes about swimming. Their stories aligned so perfectly that police had initially ruled out foul play. But now, with Ethan's body found and the autopsy results pointing to murder, those same statements looked suspiciously polished. Investigators noted that none of the 5 showed genuine surprise when informed that Ethan had not drowned. Their reactions were muted. Some appeared nervous, while others deflected questions or clung to their original versions of events. It was as if they were trying to stick to a script they had memorized, unsure how to adjust it to this new reality. Digging into their backgrounds, detectives learned more about the dynamics within Riverbight. Ethan had once been well regarded by his team, but over the past year something had shifted. Tensions had grown behind closed doors. Ethan had started asking uncomfortable questions at meetings, challenging decisions, and keeping more to himself. Some co-workers had privately described him as paranoid. Others suspected he was preparing to leave the company. Now those details took on new meaning. The team's tight-knit appearance began to crack. Small inconsistencies appeared in their statements. Who had gone to bed when? Who had last seen Ethan? And why had no one noticed the surveillance system had stopped recording for nearly 2 hours? Each answer brought new questions, and one thing became clear. Someone on that yacht wasn't telling the truth. The yacht's surveillance system had been installed for safety, standard for a vessel of its size and value. Small, motion-strip-nerd cameras were positioned in key areas: the rear deck, the hallway leading to the cabins, the galley, and the helm. Investigators believed these cameras might hold the answers to what happened during those crucial late-night hours when Ethan disappeared. What they found instead only deepened the mystery. The footage covered most of the weekend without issue. There were long stretches of normal activity, people laughing, relaxing, pouring drinks, eating meals. Ethan appeared often, sometimes chatting with Claire or sitting quietly by himself near the railing. But when investigators reached the night of his disappearance, the recordings suddenly cut out. At 12:30 a.m., the last image captured was Ethan walking alone toward the rear deck, carrying a drink. After that, nothing. The cameras remained dark until 2:11 a.m., when the hallway feed resumed, showing Mason walking toward the galley, alone. There were no technical malfunctions reported. The cameras didn't fail. They were manually disabled. Investigators confirmed this after analyzing the system's control logs. Someone had entered the security settings through the main console, which required a user code. The time of access? 12:37 a.m. 1 minute before the cameras went dark. Only 2 people on the boat had the access code: Mason, who owned the yacht, and Lucas, who helped maintain company tech equipment. When confronted with the gap in footage, both men claimed they had no idea how the cameras were shut off. Mason suggested it could have been a glitch. Lucas said maybe the power had surged during the night, but the weather had been stable and the rest of the boat's electronics functioned without issue. To investigators, the missing footage marked a deliberate attempt to hide something. Specifically, the moment Ethan either died or was forcibly removed from the yacht. The precision of the timing was chilling. Whoever turned off the cameras knew exactly when to do it and how to avoid suspicion. In many cases, surveillance footage reveals the truth, but in this one, it was the absence of footage that told a story. Someone on board wanted those hours erased, believing that without video evidence, the crime could be disguised as an accident. What they didn't count on was that the silence itself, the deliberate blackout, would become the loudest clue of all. As the investigation deepened, Ethan's digital life became the next point of focus. Detectives obtained his personal laptop and work-issued devices, hoping to find any clue as to why someone might want him dead. At first glance, Ethan's computer history looked routine. Project files, coding tools, emails with clients. But in a hidden, encrypted folder buried deep within his hard drive, investigators found something far more significant. One document stood out. It detailed suspicious transfers between company accounts and a private consulting firm registered in the Cayman Islands. Another showed altered timestamps on key product performance data that had been used to attract major investors. There were emails too, some from Mason Kell's inbox, suggesting he had knowledge of these actions and had approved them. The most damning file was titled M_K_cover-up. It included a timeline of Mason's involvement in falsifying reports ahead of a $6 million 0-cents funding round the year prior. It became clear that Ethan had been collecting this evidence methodically and quietly. A series of notes in a text file outlined his plan. To approach a journalist he trusted, someone he had worked with in the past on a cybersecurity piece. He'd even drafted a message: "I have proof of ongoing fraud inside a tech firm. I need to talk, off the record." But Ethan never sent that message. Investigators realized Ethan may have been planning to blow the whistle during or shortly after the yacht trip. The timing lined up. He had gathered all the evidence, organized it, and stored it in one secure place. He had even backed it up to an external drive, which was missing from his belongings. The working theory shifted. Ethan hadn't been killed over a spontaneous argument or drunken accident. This had been about silencing someone who knew too much. The peaceful celebration on the yacht had been a cover. Behind the laughter and drinks, someone was watching Ethan closely, waiting for the right moment to make sure he never told anyone what he had uncovered. When first questioned after Ethan's disappearance, all 5 coworkers gave near-identical statements. They said the night had ended uneventfully. Everyone had gone to their cabins, and by the time they realized Ethan was missing the next morning, it was already too late. They recalled that he had been drinking and that he seemed tired, possibly disoriented. Some even said he had made jokes about swimming. Their stories aligned so perfectly that police had initially ruled out foul play. But now, with Ethan's body found and the autopsy results pointing to murder, those same statements looked suspiciously polished. Investigators noted that none of the 5 showed genuine surprise when informed that Ethan had not drowned. Their reactions were muted. Some appeared nervous, while others deflected questions or clung to their original versions of events. It was as if they were trying to stick to a script they had memorized, unsure how to adjust it to this new reality. Digging into their backgrounds, detectives learned more about the dynamics within Riverbyte. Ethan had once been well regarded by his team, but over the past year something had shifted. Tensions had grown behind closed doors. Ethan had started asking uncomfortable questions at meetings, challenging decisions, and keeping more to himself. Some coworkers had privately described him as paranoid. Others suspected he was preparing to leave the company.
Mason Kell had positioned himself as a visionary founder, the kind of leader investors trusted and employees followed. He was polished, persuasive, and always seemed a step ahead. In interviews, he spoke about innovation and ethics, about building something meaningful. But as investigators began to connect the dots, Mason's carefully constructed image started to unravel. One detail in particular caught their attention: a message sent in the middle of the night during the exact time frame Ethan went missing. Cell phone records showed Mason's phone had been active at 1:12 a.m. EM, well after he claimed to have gone to bed. A text message had been sent from his number to an unregistered prepaid burner phone. The message was short, "Stun." Investigators traced the burner's purchase to a small electronics store in Seattle 3 days before the trip. Surveillance footage from the store showed a man in a hoodie and sunglasses paying in cash. The image wasn't clear enough for a definite identification, but Mason's build and mannerisms were strikingly similar. When questioned about the message, Mason denied ever sending it. He suggested his phone could have been accessed by someone else. But the phone had never left his cabin, according to others on board, and biometric authentication was required to unlock it. Its done message, once vague and cryptic, now seemed chillingly specific, especially when paired with the fact that the yacht's cameras had been disabled less than 40 minutes earlier. More troubling connections emerged. Ethan had flagged Mason's role in fraudulent activity in the files he compiled. He had linked Mason to the altered financial reports, the offshore transfers, and several shell companies used to launder revenue. If those documents went public, Mason wouldn't just lose his company, he could face years in prison. The pressure was building, and Mason's perfect alibi began to crack. Forensic analysis found remnants of salt water on the soles of his shoes, even though he claimed not to have gone on deck after midnight. A single hair matching Ethan's DNA was discovered in the cargo hold, an area not meant for passengers. Piece by piece, the story Mason had told was falling apart. To investigators, the picture was becoming clear. Mason wasn't just trying to protect his company, he was protecting himself. And to do that, he had to silence the one person who could bring everything crashing down. Claire Morgan had always been seen as the quiet one on the team. She rarely spoke in meetings unless asked, and often kept to herself during company events. On the yacht, she had appeared relaxed but distant, sipping wine and sketching in a small notebook she brought with her everywhere. At first, investigators didn't view her as a person of interest. She had no obvious conflict with Ethan, no leadership role in the company, and no direct ties to the financial wrongdoing he had But as the case evolved, Claire's name kept resurfacing in small, overlooked details. She had been one of the last people to see Ethan alive. She had gone out to the deck shortly before the surveillance cameras went dark, claiming she was looking at the stars. When pressed further, her answers became vague. Something in her demeanor changed, her voice unsteady, her responses less certain. A week later, detectives obtained a search warrant for Claire's apartment. Among her belongings, they found the small notebook she always carried. It wasn't a sketch pad after all, it was a handwritten journal. Inside were pages of notes, dates, and fragments of private thoughts. The entries began months earlier, revealing her growing unease about what she was witnessing at Riverbyte. She wrote about overhearing tense conversations between Mason and Lucas, and about stumbling across suspicious documents during a design review meeting. But most importantly, she wrote about Ethan. Ethan had known Ethan was planning something Several entries mentioned cryptic comments he had made, and one noted that he had shown her a file he claimed could take the whole company down. Claire hadn't wanted to get involved. She feared retaliation, but she had also been documenting everything just in case. One chilling entry, written 2 days before the yacht trip, read, "Ethan says he's ready. He's going to expose it all. I told him to be careful. He laughed. He thinks they'll back off. I'm not so sure." Her final entry before the trip was even more alarming. "They think it's under control, but Ethan knows. He's planning to go public. If something happens to him, it won't be an accident." Claire never came forward with the journal willingly, but once it was discovered, the tone of the investigation shifted. Her notes didn't just confirm Ethan's suspicions. They suggested others had known exactly what was about to happen, and that made the timeline look less like a coincidence and more like a plan. The deeper investigators dug into Ethan's past with Riverbite, the more they realized his murder had roots going back years. Long before the yacht trip, long before the fraud, there had been a betrayal, one that changed the trajectory of Ethan's life and set the stage for what would ultimately lead to his death. In the early days of Riverbite, Ethan and Mason weren't just coworkers. They were friends, college roommates, co-founders, and partners in what they hoped would become a groundbreaking tech company. They worked side by side, building something from the ground up, but as the company grew, cracks began to form. Ethan wanted to stay true to their original mission: ethical software development, transparent practices, no shortcuts. Mason, on the other hand, was more focused on rapid growth and impressing investors, even if it meant bending the truth. The tension between them escalated. Mason began holding private meetings with board members. Legal pressure mounted as disagreements turned into accusations. Eventually, Mason offered to buy out Ethan's shares. It was positioned as a business decision, but behind the scenes, there was manipulation. Ethan was pressured to sign documents that undervalued his equity, with legal threats hanging over his head if he didn't comply. He walked away with far less than he was owed, and Mason became the face of Riverbite. Ethan never spoke publicly about what happened. He took a step back, accepted a lower role in the company, and quietly kept working. But he never forgot. What no one realized was that Ethan had kept records from that time: emails, early drafts of contracts, internal memos, and screenshots of financial inconsistencies. He had never intended to use them until he discovered the new layer of fraud unfolding under Mason's leadership. Then the old betrayal resurfaced, no longer just a personal wound, but a legal weapon. Then wasn't just a threat because he had current evidence. He was dangerous because he could destroy the foundation Mason had built his empire on. By exposing both the past and the present, Ethan could ruin Mason completely. And for someone like Mason, who had climbed too high to fall quietly, that was reason enough to kill. With mounting evidence against Mason and others on board, investigators focused on uncovering who else might have played a role in Ethan's death. Attention turned toward Lucas Hart, the product manager who had been close to Mason for years and had access to the yacht's security system. Lucas's involvement in the cover-up seemed likely, but proving it required more than suspicion. Digging through Lucas's phone records and communications, detectives found a series of encrypted messages sent to the same burner phone Mason had contacted. The messages contained brief, coded instructions and confirmations, all exchanged in the hours leading up to and following Ethan's disappearance. This suggested a coordinated effort between the two men. Lucas's personal history revealed financial troubles. He had recently taken out significant loans and was struggling to keep up with payments. Friends and family said he was desperate and stressed. His connection to Mason, combined with his access to technology and the surveillance system, painted a picture of someone who might have been pressured or incentivized to help cover up the crime. Further examination of the yacht's layout uncovered a hidden compartment beneath the cargo hold, a cramped, seldom used space large enough to temporarily hold a person. Forensic teams found traces of blood and fibers matching Ethan's clothing inside. This was likely where Ethan had been held before his death, or where evidence had been hidden. Lucas was brought in for intensive questioning. His story began to unravel under the weight of physical evidence and the testimony of coworkers who noticed his nervous behavior after Ethan went missing. He admitted to disabling the cameras but denied involvement in any violence. However, discrepancies in his timeline and inability to explain the burner phone messages made his defense weak. Then came the most shocking revelation. Lucas confessed that Mason had planned everything. Mason feared Ethan's whistleblowing would destroy them all. He had ordered Lucas to help disable the cameras and distract the others while Mason confronted Ethan. The situation escalated, resulting in Ethan's fatal injury. Lucas claimed he had wanted to stop it, but Mason's influence and threats left him powerless. Lucas's testimony became a turning point in the case, exposing a conspiracy rather than a simple accident. The yacht trip was no longer a casual celebration, but a deadly trap, orchestrated by those desperate to protect their secrets. What started as a mysterious disappearance evolved into a chilling story of greed, betrayal, and murder, hidden beneath the calm waves of the ocean. The trial that followed was one of the most high-precinct cases the coastal town had ever seen. Mason Kell, once celebrated as a tech visionary, now faced multiple charges: first-degree murder, conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. Lucas Hart, cooperating with the prosecution, pleaded guilty to lesser charges in exchange for testimony. The courtroom was packed with reporters, company employees, and curious locals, all eager to see justice served. As evidence was laid out, the full scope of the crime came into focus. Prosecutors painted a picture of a man consumed by greed and fear, willing to silence a longtime friend to protect his empire. The stolen files, hidden camera footage gaps, and witness testimonies created an airtight case. The jury heard about Ethan's integrity, his attempts to expose the fraud, and the chilling events aboard the yacht. Mason's defense tried to argue that Ethan's death was a tragic accident, blaming Lucas and casting doubt on witness statements, but the overwhelming proof left little room for doubt. The emotional impact of the trial was palpable. Ethan's family spoke during the victim impact statements, recalling his kindness, intelligence, and the dreams cut short. Coworkers shared how they had trusted Mason and how betrayal had shattered their faith in the company. Claire Morgan's journal became a key piece of evidence, revealing the internal fears and warnings ignored until it was too late. After days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. Mason was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole,